They made you believe Eden was just a metaphor, a symbolic tale of sin and punishment. But metaphors don't alter chromosomes or hide encrypted sequences in your DNA. This is not a tale pulled from books, and certainly not from the internet. It's a memory retrieved from the Akashic records, a retrieval from source itself. This is story time. We were told Eden was paradise, a garden, a beginning, a place where everything was perfect, until it wasn't. Some remember it through religious stories, with forbidden fruit, talking serpents, and divine punishment. Others dismissed it as just a myth, a metaphor, a symbolic tale to explain human suffering. But what if Eden wasn't just a story? What if it was a real place, a real era, and a turning point in Earth's history? This is the forbidden story behind Eden, the one they didn't want you to remember. Before Lemuria, before cities or temples, there was Eden. Not just the garden from Scripture, but something far older, a real place, a real era. Eden was Earth during a golden age, a time when humanity lived in deep harmony with the planet. The land pulsed with life, and the human spirit was still aligned with its original blueprint. They didn't build cities. They didn't leave behind monuments. But the humans of this era were far from disconnected. They lived in harmony with the land, intuitive, empathic, and deeply attuned to Gaia's rhythms. Their wisdom wasn't written in books or carved in stone. It was felt, transmitted through the heart, passed down through the field. They lived in small, scattered groups, woven into nature instead of separated from it. No cities, no civilizations yet, only sacred relationship. And yet, they were not alone. Across the planet, certain regions held watchful presences, beings known in later myths as the Watchers. Some had traveled from beyond the stars. Others were ancient earthborn guardians who had walked these lands since before memory. Assigned by interdimensional councils to monitor the new human presence in Eden, a carefully guided stage in Earth's unfolding story. This was the Eden experiment, a controlled environment where different star lineages and Earth's native life were brought together, tested, and observed to see what humanity could become. Some walked in plain sight. Others remained hidden in the forests and mountains. The original stewards of Earth, born of Gaia herself, watching over her wild places, moving silently through the mists. Not quite human, not quite animal. A lineage older than most can imagine. Ancient beings from a parallel evolutionary path. Not animals, not apes. Known today by many names, but one echoes louder than the rest. Sasquatch. The Watcher's task was simple: observe, protect, and never interfere. But of course, that wasn't how the story unfolded. At first, their presence was subtle. They walked the land cloaked in neutrality, never disrupting the natural flow. But these were not the only eyes on Earth. A different force had also taken interest in Eden. They were not sent by the councils. They did not come to observe. They came to harvest, to experiment, to rule. These were the Anunnaki, an advanced race from Nibiru, a massive hidden world. Its orbit is so long and far from the sun that it only comes near Earth once every thousands of years, which is why most people don't even know it exists. Their technology was far beyond anything humanity had ever seen, the kind of power that could move oceans and shape continents. Their primary goal? Extract gold and monoatomic elements from Earth's crust, prized for their ability to repair their atmosphere and enhance their own longevity. But they found something else in Eden, something far more valuable than gold: conscious, adaptable, spiritual life. A planetary library encoded in the DNA of Earth's native beings. They saw potential, thinking these beings could speed up the mining work. But that plan quickly evolved into something far more dangerous to their control. And so, they shifted their focus. The Anunnaki were not watchers, not in the original sense. They were outsiders, interlopers, uninvited players who inserted themselves into the Edenic experiment. And while some watchers remained loyal to their oath of non-interference, others, tempted or compromised, began to collaborate with these new arrivals. This is where the story changes, where the sacred blueprint begins to bend, where Eden, once an open harmonic zone, begins to close. A perimeter was established, energetic barriers sealed the region, and what had once been an open garden of life became a contained laboratory. The containment of Eden marked the beginning of something else entirely. Inside the sealed zone, the Anunnaki began conducting genetic experiments. They weren't just mining resources, they were engineering life. At first they used what was available: early humans, Neanderthal groups, even the Sasquatch, whose DNA held unique multidimensional keys. Some were lured, others were taken. Many were never seen again. What happened inside the Edenic perimeter would later be remembered in symbols and parables: the garden, the serpent, the fall of man. But this wasn't allegory. It was history, rewritten to hide the lab. In their experiments, the Anunnaki altered the human genome, not just physically, but energetically. They introduced specific control codes, silenced key DNA strands, installed frequency gates that limited perception. They encoded symbols, sacred geometry, and mathematical harmonics into the new blueprint, but not to empower, to contain. The story of Adam and Eve comes from one of these early genetic pairings, not the first humans, but first of the modified lineage, bred in the lab, observed, taught just enough, and kept inside. Eve's name was not Eve. Adam's was not Adam. They were later renamed, simplified into symbols. But their true designations trace back to older records. In the ancient Sumerian tablets, the one known as Adam was called Adamu, a word in Akkadian meaning the man or first man. He wasn't born, he was built. A prototype, stable, compliant, and programmable. And Eve? She aligns with an ancient figure called Ninti, Lady of Life. She who gives life, a being created, not birthed, to complement Adamu genetically and energetically. The tablets say she was crafted from a rib, but this wasn't bone. It was code, a symbolic reference to cloning from biological material. The same story told in metaphor again and again. They were prototypes, but not just any prototypes. Adamu and Ninti were the first stable, fertile hybrids. The early attempts had failed, too wild, too fragile, or spiritually volatile. But these two, they were perfectly balanced. Just enough awareness to function, but not enough to rebel. They were designed to obey. And for a time, they did. And here's where it gets interesting. In 1987, scientists discovered what's now known as mitochondrial Eve, a genetic marker pointing to a single female ancestor from whom all modern humans descend on the maternal line. They said she lived in Africa around 150,000 to 200,000 years ago. The media called her Eve. But here's the problem, and geneticists agree. Humanity could not have descended from just one couple. Think about it. With only two people, their children would have had to reproduce with each other, leading to extreme inbreeding. That's called genetic bottlenecking, when a population becomes so small that genetic diversity collapses, causing defects and making survival nearly impossible. A healthy, thriving species needs thousands to start with. So, what's the truth? The truth is, we didn't come from just one couple. We came from a controlled batch, cloned, modified, replicated. Adamu and Ninti weren't chosen. They were engineered by the Anunnaki. And when they began to awaken beyond their programming, that's when everything changed. Part of that awakening came from a single, forbidden source inside the enclosure. what ancient texts call the Tree of Life. The Tree of Life was not a literal tree. It was a living, conscious archive, a bioorganic creation seeded by the original designers long before the Anunnaki arrived. Its roots connected deep into Earth's crystalline network. Its branches reached into the planetary grid and the greater cosmic web. And its fruit was not food. It was pure data, access to stored memory, multidimensional awareness, and the full, unaltered human blueprint. The Anunnaki restricted access to it. They knew that those who connected with it could unlock dormant DNA, restore memory, and access knowledge far beyond their programming. For that reason, it was strictly forbidden. Only the highest-ranking geneticists were allowed near it. One of them was Enki. He was one of the highest-ranking Anunnaki geneticists. A master of life sciences, architect of hybrid species, and, unlike his half-brother Enlil, he had a fascination with the creative potential of the human mind. Enlil, the appointed commander of the Earth mission, saw humans as a labor force, nothing more. They were to remain obedient, efficient, and dependent. Any deviation from this order threatened the mission and his authority. Enki disagreed. From the beginning, he'd inserted subtle extras into the human genome, capacities for intuition, empathy, and creativity that were not in the original blueprint approved by the Council. To Enki, the human project was not just about serving the Anunnaki. It was about creating a species that could one day stand beside them. So what was so special about Eve? In this batch of hybrids, Eve, or rather, Ninti, Lady of Life in Sumerian, carried the most refined version of the genetic code. She was a living key, able to pass on traits more efficiently than any other female in Eden. And Adam, Adamu, her mate, shared this enhanced genome. If they awakened, their offspring would too. The so-called serpent moment, the one many know from the Bible, was never about a serpent in a tree or a woman biting into an apple. It was a calculated smear designed to turn a moment of liberation into a tale of disobedience. The Enlil faction of the Anunnaki called Enki the Serpent after he secretly restored human DNA strands they had shut down. They feared what would happen if humanity remembered its origin and power. So they twisted the story to make him the villain. Now here's one detail they don't teach in Sunday school. The double serpent symbol you still see in modern medicine, the caduceus, comes from this moment, mirroring the DNA helix Enki helped reactivate. Ever wonder why a symbol tied to temptation is now tied to healing? That's no accident. Enki's act became the temptation, the DNA upgrade became the forbidden apple, and the awakening was rewritten as an act of rebellion against God. In truth, there was no apple, just the transfer of knowledge that could free humanity. The apple was symbolic, later inserted to hide the real event behind something simple and harmless. A bite of fruit is easier to mock than the idea of a divine jailbreak. It wasn't a sin. It was the day the locks started to break. This all took place inside the controlled biodomes, disguised as a routine health inspection. Enki met privately with Ninti, using a resonance device, a handheld emitter that stimulated dormant neural pathways and unlocked data hidden deep in her DNA. What she experienced felt like a flood of images, sounds, and knowing, visions of the stars, of beings before the Anunnaki, of a time when humanity was sovereign. Ninti told Adamu. At first he didn't believe her, until Enki repeated the process with him. The two spent days whispering in the gardens, connecting the fragments, realizing they had been raised inside a cage disguised as paradise. They told a small circle of other hybrids, carefully in secret. But secrets spread. Soon subtle changes in behavior began to ripple through the compound. Some hybrids hesitated to follow orders. Others began questioning the watchers assigned to monitor them. Enlil saw the shift immediately. When he traced it back to Adamu and Ninti, the decision was swift. Expulsion. This was no gentle sending off. They were stripped of access to the food, water, and energy grids of Eden. The great gates, guarded by armed watchers, closed behind them. The lush, regulated climate of the compound gave way to the raw earth, with its predators, storms, and unfamiliar terrain. They had no tools, no shelter, and no assurance of survival. But they carried something far more dangerous to the Anunnaki than any weapon: the spark of remembrance. But what happened next? Word spread, not through spoken language, but through vibration, through frequency. The others in the lab felt it. Something had changed. Eve, or Ninti, as she was once known, had activated a dormant strand, not just in herself, but in the collective field. Adam, Adamu, followed closely behind. Not out of rebellion, but resonance. He recognized what she had seen, and once both stepped outside the boundaries of their programming, they could no longer remain within the system. The expulsion from Eden wasn't a punishment. It was containment protocol, an energetic quarantine. Because once the awakened frequency started to ripple through the others, it was only a matter of time before the entire batch destabilized. Adam and Eve were not alone. There were others, other clones, other prototypes. But they were the first to break through the veil, and that made them dangerous. Not to humanity, but to the ones running the experiment. They were marked, tracked, and sent beyond the gates. But they carried something the Anunnaki couldn't erase: the seed. The original human blueprint, full DNA potential, the memory of who we were, and the drive to break free. Hidden deep, it waited, until the time came to awaken it. When Enki's gift of knowledge began to ripple through the enclosure, it didn't stop with Adamu and Ninti. Others sensed the shift. Some began questioning their reality. A few attempted to awaken the rest. That was the real threat. Not two altered beings, but the possibility of contagious awareness. The Anunnaki acted quickly. Those showing signs of awakening were removed, reassigned, or erased. Adamu, Ninti, and a handful of others were expelled entirely from the enclosure. But they did not vanish into nothingness. They found the wild lands, and there the originals welcomed them. These were humans untouched by Anunnaki intervention, taller, hardier, in deep rhythm with the forests, rivers, and skies. They lived by Gaia's seasons, spoke in the silent language of energy, and carried no word for ownership, because nothing was separate from them. The hybrids, though, they carried a different spark. Star-coded memory strands from the Watcher's DNA, but also a vulnerability to fear, hierarchy, and control. When these two lineages met, something new began to form, a merging of Earth's primal wisdom and the stars' forgotten knowledge. One day these people would seed Lemuria, but not yet, because Eden's fall had set other forces in motion. The Watchers themselves were now divided. Some sided with Enki, believing the hybrids deserved to awaken. Others clung to the original command: observe, never interfere. The fracture reached the Galactic Council, forcing a decision. In the beginning, they had allowed the Anunnaki's presence, believing it would be a controlled uplift, a way to accelerate human potential under supervision. But they underestimated how quickly power could twist purpose. This was a reminder that even the highest councils are not immune to misjudgment. Full intervention risked destroying the experiment entirely, so they chose a quieter path. They wrapped Earth in the first energetic containment field, the earliest form of the veil, a frequency barrier designed to limit what humans could sense, remember, and access. From that moment, human perception narrowed. Whole realms of awareness slid just out of reach. The Council's concern wasn't humans knowing the truth. It was timing. Enki's sudden intervention was like forcing a seed to sprout overnight. The roots weren't strong enough. Without gradual integration, the shock could fracture minds, destabilize communities, and collapse the balance needed for life. The first veil wasn't punishment, but stabilization, narrowing perception just enough to slow awakening, giving humanity time to grow into its potential without burning out. The Anunnaki used this to their advantage. They knew that full DNA activation required the union of masculine and feminine energies. So they began to target the feminine, rewriting creation stories, silencing womb wisdom, reducing the role of the intuitive and the nurturer. A subtle suppression at first, but enough to tip the balance for generations to come. Over time, the imbalance deepened, and the human experiment began to fracture. When the Council of Worlds could no longer ignore the chaos within Eden, they intervened. The experiment, once intended to uplift, had become a battleground of control, manipulation, and genetic tampering. The first great veil was imposed, severing much of humanity's memory, energetic capacity, and direct connection to Source. Enki, who had defied the original protocols by giving the humans knowledge and expanded awareness, was removed from his position and forced into exile from the earth plane, remembered in myth as the serpent, the bringer of forbidden wisdom. Enlil, who had pushed for domination and strict control over humanity, was recalled to answer for the misuse of power and stripped of his authority over the human project. Many Anunnaki who had supported the control agenda were expelled or reassigned to distant worlds, forbidden from direct interference, though some evaded removal and continued their influence in secret through bloodlines and covert agendas. Their departure marked the close of an era, but the damage was done. Humanity was left diminished, confused, and vulnerable under the veil, their true potential buried deep within dormant strands of DNA. And here lies the uncomfortable truth. The biblical story of Adam and Eve as the origin of all humanity was never literal. Genetic science confirms a single couple could never seed an entire species without collapse from inbreeding. We were not descended from one man and one woman. We were cloned, designed, and scattered across the planet. Eden was never about sin and punishment. It was about control and awakening, and the fear of what humans might become if they remembered who they really are. Eden, once a garden, then a lab, had become the seedbed of both control and liberation. Gaia did not stay silent. The Earth's own consciousness sent out a pulse, a vibrational response to the distortion that unfolded, and to the suppression of the divine feminine. The heart, intuition, and creative force of life itself. From that pulse, a new civilization was seeded, one unlike any before it, woven in harmony with the planet, where the feminine rose again to lead in balance with the masculine. Here, healing, intuition, and unity were not just values, but the foundation of all existence. This was Lemuria. In our previous scroll, we told the story of that world. But in the next chapter, we'll go even further back, to when Earth was first chosen, and the divine blueprint was born. Not the modified vessel of the Eden labs, but the first unaltered human design, a being unlike anything the universe had seen, the reason Earth was chosen in the first place. And no, they did not crawl out of caves or evolve from apes. They were seeded. They were intentional. They were us. If something in this story gave you chills, if your heart ached or your eyes filled for reasons you can't explain, it's because you're remembering. This isn't for entertainment. It's a key, a frequency, not to distract you, but to awaken you. If it spoke to you, like, subscribe, and share what stirred within you. Your memories of Eden, your own remembrance. They might help someone else remember too.